The restaurant was bustling with life, the clinking of plates and glasses blending with the low hum of conversation. Waiters weaved skillfully between tables, carrying trays balanced with precision, their movements practiced and smooth. The smell of freshly cooked meals filled the air, mingling with the subtle scent of flowers on each table. At first glance, it looked like any other busy evening, full of laughter, chatter, and the soft background music that made the atmosphere warm and inviting. Among the staff was a young waitress who moved quietly through the crowd, her steps careful and deliberate. She had been working at the restaurant for a few years, and although she was competent and quick, there was something different about her. She didn't speak loudly to the customers or shout across the room like some of her colleagues. Instead, she relied on small gestures and written notes. Each interaction required more effort than usual, but she never let frustration show. Her eyes were alert, scanning the room, taking in every detail, always making sure the guests were comfortable. The tables were full of people dressed in elegant attire, enjoying an evening out. Some were celebrating birthdays, others were having business dinners, and a few were simply enjoying a night out with friends. A group at one corner laughed loudly, their voices carrying across the room. Another table had a couple whispering softly to each other, completely absorbed in their conversation. The young waitress approached them with a gentle smile and a notepad in hand. She handed the menus over and waited patiently, watching them point and nod, scribbling down the orders they made, making sure she got everything correct. Not everyone in the restaurant was patient. Some customers grew restless when the waitress took a moment longer to communicate. A few furrowed their brows and exchanged glances, wondering why she wasn't speaking directly to them. One man tapped his fingers impatiently on the table, sighing loudly. A woman at the next table muttered something under her breath and looked around as if searching for another server. Yet despite the occasional frustration from the guests, the waitress maintained her calm. Her movements were precise, her demeanor polite, and her focus unwavering. She had learned long ago that anger or impatience never helped, and she had grown skilled at managing her interactions quietly and efficiently. In the midst of all this activity, a man sat alone at a table near the back of the restaurant. He was older, well-dressed, and carried an air of quiet confidence. His sharp eyes scanned the room carefully, noticing details others might miss. He observed the staff as they moved among the tables, noting how they interacted with the guests. When his gaze settled on the young waitress, he noticed something different. Unlike the others, she moved with a sense of careful grace, almost as if she were navigating a world where every step needed to be measured and considered. There was a small hesitation in her movements, but it wasn't fear, it was carefulness. A carefulness born from experience. As she approached his table to take his order, the man noticed that she didn't speak. She smiled politely, set down her notepad and pen, and waited. The man watched her, intrigued. He realized that she was communicating differently, using signs and written notes, yet doing so with confidence and efficiency. He could tell she was skilled, even though the room was noisy and busy. The way she managed her tasks, without drawing attention to her own challenges, was remarkable. Other customers began to notice her as well. Some leaned forward in curiosity, wondering why she wasn't speaking. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about the situation. A few were patient, nodding understandingly as she handed over menus and took orders. The atmosphere shifted subtly, a mix of curiosity and unease spreading through the crowd. People who had been enjoying their evening without thought suddenly became aware of the young waitress and the extra effort she had to make just to do her job. The kitchen staff worked tirelessly, shouting orders and calling out dishes ready to be served. The waitresses and waiters darted back and forth, balancing plates and ensuring that drinks were refilled. In the middle of this controlled chaos, the young waitress moved with quiet determination. She paused at one table to explain the specials, writing them carefully on her notepad. She moved to another table to take an order, nodding politely when the customer pointed to the menu. Each interaction required more attention than usual, yet she handled it with grace. Her calm presence seemed to create a bubble around her, a small space where she could operate efficiently despite the noise and pressure around her. A moment of tension arose when a customer at a corner table grew impatient. They had been waiting for a while, and when the waitress approached, they questioned her about the order. She responded by writing quickly on her notepad, explaining the situation with a polite smile. The customer's eyes flicked to the pen and paper, reading the message. Their expressions softened slightly, though the frustration in their voice lingered. This small interaction caught the attention of others nearby, who began to watch how she handled the situation. The tension in the room was palpable, yet she remained composed. Showing no sign of irritation or fear, the CEO continued to observe quietly from his table. He was not dining with anyone, yet he felt connected to the situation unfolding before him. There was a moment when the young waitress paused, her hands resting on the edge of a table as she took a breath. He noticed her eyes darting around the room, checking to see if anyone needed attention, then quickly returning to her tasks. It was a subtle display of resilience, one that only someone paying close attention would notice. He realized that the small gestures, the quiet communication, and the careful movements all indicated something extraordinary. This was someone managing challenges that others could barely comprehend, all while maintaining professionalism and dignity. As the evening progressed, the young waitress continued her work. She moved from table to table, taking orders, delivering food, and refilling drinks. The noise of the restaurant never seemed to overwhelm her, though there were moments when it must have been exhausting. Her notepad became an extension of her voice, allowing her to communicate clearly with customers who might have otherwise been impatient or rude. Each successful interaction was a small victory, a moment where she bridged the gap between her abilities and the expectations of the world around her. The crowd, now more aware of her situation, began to respond differently. Some smiled warmly when she approached. Others waited patiently, understanding that communication required effort and attention. Even those who had been frustrated earlier seemed to soften, recognizing the dedication she brought to her work. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted subtly, a mixture of admiration and curiosity, replacing impatience and judgment. Throughout all this, the CEO remained focused. He had seen many people in his life, yet this young waitress commanded his attention in a way few others did. Her resilience, quiet strength, and ability to navigate a challenging environment without complaint or visible stress impressed him. He felt an urge to act, though he was unsure of what the right approach would be. He did not want to embarrass her or draw unwanted attention, but he knew that the effort she put into every interaction deserved recognition and support. For the young waitress, the evening was just another shift, filled with tasks and challenges. She moved efficiently, smiled politely, and handled every interaction with care. The stress of the room, the occasional impatience of customers, and the constant need to adapt did not deter her. Her determination and grace shone quietly amidst the chaos, unnoticed by many, but not by everyone. As the night wore on, the restaurant began to slow. Some tables had finished their meals, others lingered over dessert and coffee. The young waitress continued her work with the same focus, taking care to ensure that every guest left satisfied. The CEO watched her from a distance, recognizing the quiet heroism in her actions. In that moment, the room felt different. It was still a busy restaurant, still filled with noise and activity. But there was a new awareness, subtle respect that had begun to grow among those present. No one yet knew that this evening would change everything, that a single act could alter the atmosphere in the room and leave an impression on everyone present. But as the young waitress moved gracefully through the crowd, handling every challenge with dignity and care, the stage was set for something extraordinary. Her story, her quiet resilience, and her ability to communicate against the odds would soon capture the attention of everyone around her. Beginning with the man who had been watching quietly all along, it was an ordinary evening in an extraordinary way. The waitress continued her work, unaware of how much she had already impressed a quiet observer, and unaware of the moment that was about to arrive. A moment that would stop everyone in the room, leaving them frozen in surprise, admiration, and reflection. The night was far from over, and the ordinary actions of one determined young woman were about to create an extraordinary ripple across the restaurant. The evening continued, and the restaurant seemed busier than ever. The soft hum of conversation mingled with the sound of plates being set down and silverware clinking. Waiters moved between tables with practiced ease, carrying trays filled with meals that smelled of spices, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. The young waitress continued her work, carrying her tepid and pen, moving quietly yet with purpose. She paused at a table of 4, smiling politely as she waited for them to finish deciding on their orders. She watched carefully, noting their gestures, their subtle signs, and their pointing to different items on the menu. It was not the first time she had encountered impatient customers. She had learned to handle it over time, to read expressions and body language, to sense frustration before it turned into anger. One table in particular caught her attention. A man tapped his fingers on the table, sighing repeatedly, while a woman beside him muttered under her breath, clearly annoyed at the wait. She approached them carefully, placing her notepad on the table and gesturing that she would write down their choices. The man raised his eyebrows, momentarily startled, but waited as she quickly wrote down the order with neat handwriting. The woman read the note and nodded, still a little impatient, but willing to accept the explanation. It was a small victory for the waitress. A quiet success that she did not announce but felt internally. Other staff members glanced at her occasionally, some with concern and others with curiosity. They had grown used to her way of working, but it still drew attention when a difficult customer interaction occurred. The manager, who was busy handling the kitchen and supervising the staff, noticed her approach a table where a couple was clearly frustrated. He stepped closer, unsure if he should intervene, but hesitated, sensing that she had things under control. She smiled, maintaining her calm, and used her pen and notepad to explain that the order would be ready soon and that the kitchen was doing its best. The couple exchanged glances, reading her note, and slowly their frustration began to ease. It was remarkable how something so simple could change the mood of the table. Across the restaurant, CEO continued to watch quietly from his table near the back. He observed the subtle tensions that arose and the way the young waitress handled them. His eyes followed her as she moved with careful steps. As she managed multiple tables, taking orders, delivering drinks, and ensuring everyone was attended to. He noticed the slight pause in her movements when she approached a table of guests who were particularly impatient. She paused, gathered herself, and then approached confidently, using her notepad to communicate. There was no hesitation, no sign of frustration. She had mastered her craft in a way that few could appreciate fully. The crowd began to notice the tension as well. A few patrons whispered to one another, pointing discreetly toward the waitress and discussing why she wasn't speaking. Others remained curious, watching how she interacted with the guests. Some began to realize that her efforts required patience and understanding. And slowly, a sense of admiration began to replace irritation. The restaurant, which had been filled with ordinary noise and casual chatter, now had an undertone of awareness, quiet recognition that something important was unfolding before them. A particularly tense moment occurred when a customer at a corner table grew noticeably impatient. He had been waiting for a special dish that was taking longer than usual. When the young waitress approached to explain, he frowned and raised his voice slightly, demanding to know why it was taking so long. She froze for a moment, sensing the frustration in his tone, and then calmly picked up her notepad. She wrote a message explaining that the dish was being prepared carefully to ensure it was perfect and would arrive shortly. She handed it to him with a polite smile. The man read it, his eyes widening slightly, and then he softened. He gestured with a nod, acknowledging her effort. The interaction drew the attention of surrounding tables, who watched quietly, sensing the tension and its resolution. The young waitress had diffused a potentially embarrassing situation with patience and skill. Meanwhile, CEO decided to observe more closely. He had seen many people in his life, but the young waitress's poise and careful approach struck him in a way that was unusual. There was a quiet determination in her eyes, a sense of resilience that could not be taught. He noticed how she scanned the room constantly, not just to serve but to anticipate potential problems, to prevent frustration before it arose. She was managing not just her tasks, but also the emotions of everyone around her. It was a skill born out of experience, necessity, and a deep understanding of human nature. As the night progressed, more guests became aware of her situation. The couple who had been frustrated earlier now smiled politely as she approached. waiting patiently for her to take their order. Another table of 4 watched her with curiosity, observing the way she communicated through writing and gestures. The young waitress handled each table with the same calm efficiency, moving seamlessly between tasks, her focus unwavering. There was a sense of quiet respect that began to grow in the room, an acknowledgement of her effort that went beyond mere politeness. The restaurant staff, too, took notice. Some whispered among themselves, sharing observations about her method and efficiency. Others admired her patience and the way she remained composed under pressure. Even the manager, who had initially been unsure whether to step in during difficult interactions, began to recognize her unique abilities. He observed her handling multiple tables, diffusing tension, and maintaining a sense of calm in the midst of chaos. It was a reminder that true skill and resilience often went unnoticed, hidden in the details of everyday work. A few moments later, another challenge arose. A family with young children had arrived, and the children were restless and noisy. The parents looked frazzled, trying to manage their kids while also enjoying their meal. The young waitress approached with her usual calm demeanor, kneeling slightly to meet the children's eyes. She used simple signs and gestures, accompanied by a few written notes, to communicate with the family. The parents watched in amazement as she managed to engage the children, distract them briefly, and guide them patiently. The tension at the table eased, and the family began to relax, enjoying the meal with renewed comfort. The CEO observed this interaction closely, noting her ability to adapt to different situations and personalities with ease. As the evening wore on, the young waitress continued her work, moving tirelessly from table to table. She took careful notes, delivered food promptly, refilled drinks, and ensured that every guest received attention. The customers, once impatient or unaware, now watched with appreciation and respect. Some offered smiles and nods of encouragement. Others whispered quietly to one another, sharing admiration for her composure and skill. The restaurant had transformed subtly from a place of ordinary dining to a space where the quiet efforts of one individual had begun to inspire those around her. The CEO remained seated, observing quietly. He noticed the smallest details, the way her eyes flicked to each table, the way her hands moved gracefully as she wrote notes, the patience in her posture, and the confidence in her actions. He understood that what she was doing required more than just skill. It required courage, resilience, and a deep understanding of people. He realized that she had faced challenges that many could not imagine, and that she had overcome them with quiet dignity. His respect for her grew with every interaction he witnessed. A moment came when a customer at another table grew impatient, raising their voice and questioning the waitress. She paused briefly, taking a deep breath, and then calmly wrote a note explaining the situation. The customer read it, their expression softening. They nodded and smiled, acknowledging her effort and patience. The surrounding tables watched in silence, absorbing the interaction and the way she managed it. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted subtly, with a sense of quiet admiration replacing earlier tension. The young waitress, unaware of the impact she was having on those around her, continued to move with precision and care. Each step she took, each gesture she made, was deliberate and thoughtful. She was not just serving meals. She was navigating a complex web of human expectations, emotions, and interactions. Her ability to do so with grace and patience was remarkable, and those who observed closely, including the CEO, could not help but be impressed. The evening drew on, and the restaurant began to slow. Some tables had finished their meals, while others lingered over dessert and coffee. The young waitress continued her work, attending to every need with quiet dedication. The CEO watched her one last time before preparing to leave, recognizing that this evening had revealed something extraordinary. Her story, though largely invisible to most of the crowd, had begun to unfold in small but meaningful ways. It was a story of resilience, patience, and quiet strength, one that would soon capture the attention of everyone in the restaurant. The stage was set for a moment that would change everything, a moment that would stop everyone in the room, leaving them frozen in surprise and admiration. The young waitress continued her work, unaware of the extraordinary impact she was having on those around her. of the remarkable encounter that was about to happen. The restaurant was alive with the usual evening energy, yet there was an unusual tension in the air. Guests moved between their conversations and meals, but their eyes often drifted toward the young waitress. She had become the quiet center of attention without even realizing it. Each table she approached seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how she would handle requests, questions, and sometimes impatience. Her presence had a subtle effect on the room, drawing observation and admiration in equal measure. The CEO, seated quietly at his table in the back, observed carefully. He had already seen the patience, precision, and quiet strength of the waitress, and he was certain that her way of working required skills and courage far beyond ordinary. He noticed the small pauses she took, the way she adjusted her pen, the careful way she communicated with each customer. Every small interaction revealed her resilience and the invisible challenges she navigated. Every day, a moment came when a group at a nearby table grew frustrated over a delayed order. Voices were raised and a few hands gestured impatiently. The young waitress approached, her steps steady, not rushed, and held out her notepad. She wrote a note explaining that the order was being prepared with care and would arrive shortly. She handed it to the lead customer with a polite smile. The man read it, his eyes widening slightly as he registered the explanation. The tension in his voice softened, and he nodded in acknowledgement. The surrounding guests, who had been watching silently, exchanged looks of admiration and quiet amazement. Some whispered to each other, recognizing that handling such situations required more than just professionalism. It required empathy and skill. The young waitress moved on, delivering drinks to another table while maintaining her calm composure. Her eyes flicked toward the CEO, though she did not know him, and for a brief moment their gazes met. There was a flicker of understanding, a recognition of effort and challenge. It was a small connection, almost imperceptible, but significant. The CEO had seen many impressive things in his life, yet the quiet grace and skill of this waitress struck him in a way few people ever had. He felt a surge of respect and an instinctive urge to help, to acknowledge her resilience and support her in a meaningful way. The evening progressed, and the restaurant continued to fill with guests. The soft hum of conversation was punctuated by laughter, the clink of cutlery, and the occasional voice of a child. The young waitress navigated it all with precision, attending to every table with care. She paused briefly at one table where a family was having trouble understanding the menu. The parents appeared slightly frustrated, glancing between each other and then to the waitress. She smiled, knelt slightly to be at their level, and began writing notes that explained the options in simple terms. The family read her notes and smiled, visibly relieved. She had diffused another tense situation with patience and skill, leaving the family feeling respected and cared for. The CEO watched this quietly, realizing that her ability to communicate without raising her voice or displaying frustration was extraordinary. In a world where patience was often in short supply, she had mastered an art that most people overlooked. It was not just the act of serving food, it was managing emotions, expectations, and perceptions with finesse. Each note, each gesture, each careful movement was a testament to her quiet strength and intelligence. As the evening continued, another challenge presented itself. A couple at a table near the front seemed increasingly restless. The man spoke loudly, questioning why their order had not yet arrived. The young waitress approached, pen in hand, and wrote a note explaining that the kitchen was handling their order carefully and it would arrive shortly. She handed the note to the man with a polite nod. He read it, and his eyes softened as he recognized the effort she had taken to communicate clearly and respectfully. The surrounding tables watched silently, sensing the tension resolve in a quiet, almost magical way. A ripple of admiration moved across the room as people realized that she was not just a server, but a mediator, a problem solver, and someone who could bring calm to a stressful situation. The CEO, feeling a growing need to act, stood slowly from his seat. He moved deliberately toward the waitress, careful not to cause a scene or draw unwanted attention. The staff and guests continued their conversations, unaware of the approach, until he was close enough for her to notice. She paused for a moment, her eyes meeting his. and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, and a shared awareness that something significant was about to happen. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, the background noise fading slightly as attention subtly shifted to the small interaction unfolding at the center of the room. Without a word, the CEO began to use sign language. His movements were deliberate and clear, precise enough for someone familiar with it to understand. The young waitress froze for a moment, her eyes widening in surprise. It was rare, she realized, to encounter someone who could communicate with her in her own language. She felt a mixture of relief and astonishment, and a smile slowly spread across her face. They began to converse silently, effortlessly bridging the gap that had seemed insurmountable moments before. The conversation revealed immediate concerns, the orders, the schedule, and a few challenges she had faced during the evening. He listened carefully, responding in sign language with calm and understanding. Each gesture reassured her, providing support in a way she had not expected. The connection between them was immediate and genuine, a mutual understanding born from recognition and respect. Guests who observed the scene were captivated, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding without fully understanding it. Whispers spread quietly, a mixture of curiosity and admiration. As people realized that the waitress was interacting with someone who understood her world, the young waitress explained, through signs, a small difficulty she had encountered with a particular table. The CEO responded thoughtfully, offering suggestions and guidance, using sign language fluently. It was clear that he had experience in communicating this way, and his calm approach made her feel supported rather than scrutinized. The guests around them noticed the unusual interaction, their attention drawn to the rare and meaningful connection unfolding in front of them. Some leaned slightly forward, their curiosity evident, yet no one interrupted. It was as if the room collectively understood the importance of this moment, a silent acknowledgement of the human connection being displayed as their conversation continued. The CEO subtly guided her through a few solutions to immediate challenges, helping her navigate the evening more smoothly. She listened intently, nodding, grateful for the support. It was rare, she realized, to encounter someone who not only understood her method of communication but also treated her with dignity and respect. This small but significant interaction created a ripple of change in her confidence, a boost that would influence the rest of her shift. The CEO's presence was both reassuring and empowering, a reminder that empathy and understanding could make a real difference in someone's life. The surrounding guests, initially curious, now watched in silent amazement. They observed how the young waitress moved with renewed confidence, how her posture straightened slightly, how her hands gestured more freely as she communicated. It was subtle, but noticeable to those paying close attention. The CEO had not only acknowledged her efforts, but had actively supported her, creating a moment that transcended ordinary dining experiences. People began to sense that they were witnessing something rare, a quiet act of kindness and understanding that could change the atmosphere of the room. The manager, who had been observing from a distance, noticed the shift as well. He saw the young waitress's renewed confidence, the way she handled tables with more ease and the calm assurance in her interactions. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, how significant this small gesture of support could be. In a busy restaurant, where pressure and stress often dominate, this moment of human connection stood out as extraordinary. It was a reminder that empathy and understanding could transform not only the experience of a single employee, but also the perception of the entire room as the night progressed. The young waitress continued her work, now with a subtle glow of confidence. She moved from table to table, taking orders, delivering meals, and refilling drinks, all while maintaining the same calm and professional demeanor. The guests, who had once grown impatient or skeptical, now observed her with a newfound respect. Some offered smiles, others whispered quietly among themselves, all acknowledging the quiet strength she displayed. The room seemed to carry a slightly different energy, a sense of admiration and awareness that had not been present earlier. The CEO remained nearby, watching her navigate the remaining tasks with ease. He saw how the small act of understanding and communication had transformed her approach, The confidence and calm she now exhibited was a testament to the power of empathy. And it was clear that her entire shift was unfolding differently because of the interaction. It was a simple, yet profound demonstration of the human capacity to support and uplift one another in meaningful ways. A few moments later, another tense interaction arose. A customer raised their voice, questioning a delay with a dessert order. The young waitress paused, taking a deep breath, and then wrote a note explaining the situation clearly and politely. She handed it over with a smile. The customer read it and immediately softened, acknowledging her effort with a nod. Nearby tables watched quietly, and the room collectively recognized the skill and patience required to handle such situations effectively. It was another small but meaningful victory for her, one that reinforced the admiration of those around her. The CEO knew that his role was not to take over, but to provide support and understanding. He had demonstrated that even a simple act of communication and recognition could have a profound impact. The conversation between the CEO and the young waitress continued silently, but it was filled with meaning. Guests and staff alike began to notice that something unusual was happening. The young waitress's hands moved gracefully as she signed, her eyes bright with surprise and focus. The CEO's gestures were smooth, deliberate, and confident, making it clear that he understood her completely. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded for both of them, as if the world outside had disappeared and only the communication between them mattered. Through the signs, the CEO learned the truth. The young waitress was deaf. She had faced challenges in school and had learned to communicate primarily through sign language and written notes. She explained that working in a busy restaurant was often difficult because people were impatient. Not everyone understood her methods. Despite these challenges, she loved her job. She loved interacting with people, helping them enjoy their meals and seeing smiles on their faces. Her voice might not carry sound, but her determination spoke louder than any words could. The CEO listened attentively, responding with signs that conveyed understanding, respect, and empathy. He shared briefly that he had learned sign language years ago to communicate with someone close to him who was deaf. He never expected to use it professionally or in public in this way, but he had never forgotten its importance. This connection, unplanned yet meaningful, bridged a gap that many people never even noticed existed. The young waitress's eyes glistened with gratitude and relief. For the first time that evening, she felt fully understood and supported. Guests at nearby tables had stopped what they were doing, noticing the unique interaction. Whispers began circulating, a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Some diners quietly recorded the moment on their phones, while others just observed, captivated by the silent yet profound communication taking place. People who had grown impatient earlier now looked on with newfound respect. They began to recognize the effort and skill it took for the young waitress to manage her duties under such pressure. The room was charged with a quiet energy, a mixture of awe and appreciation for the human connection unfolding. Through their silent conversation, the CEO learned more about the young waitress's daily struggles. She described moments when customers grew impatient, the difficulty of moving quickly between tables while managing orders and requests, and the subtle ways she had to communicate with colleagues and customers alike. He understood that she had developed extraordinary patience and resilience. She had learned to read faces, gestures, and moods to anticipate problems before they arose. Every action was deliberate, every movement measured, all to ensure that the guests received the best service possible. The CEO began to offer small gestures of help, signing simple instructions or suggestions. He guided her through a tricky interaction with a customer who had been particularly impatient. She followed his advice, communicating calmly and clearly, and the situation was resolved smoothly. The table of guests was satisfied, unaware of the silent guidance that had just occurred behind the scenes. The young waitress felt a surge of confidence, realizing that she now had an ally who understood her in a way few others did. The sense of relief was palpable. She could continue her work with renewed focus and strength. As the evening progressed, the interaction between the CEO and the young waitress had a ripple effect. The staff began to notice the change in her demeanor. Her movements became even more confident, her gestures more assured. She approached each table with a calm authority, knowing that she was supported in a profound way. Customers who had previously been impatient or skeptical now observed her with curiosity and respect. Some offered small smiles or nods, silently acknowledging the effort and skill she displayed. It was as if the quiet strength of one person had begun to influence the entire atmosphere of the restaurant. A particularly moving moment occurred when the CEO noticed a table where a customer had been loudly complaining about the wait. The young waitress approached, signs and notepad ready. She communicated clearly and respectfully, explaining the delay and offering reassurance. The customer's frustration melted into understanding. Nearby diners watched, impressed by her calm and composed handling of the situation. The CEO's silent support had not only helped her navigate challenges, but had also elevated her confidence, allowing her natural skill and patience to shine more fully. The manager, who had been observing from a distance, now understood the significance of what was happening. He saw the young waitress's transformation, the quiet confidence she exuded, and the way she managed interactions with ease. The presence of the CEO, someone who understood and validated her experience, had a remarkable effect. The manager began to consider how small gestures of understanding and empathy could have a powerful impact on staff morale and performance. He realized that recognition and support, even subtle, could change the course of a person's day or even their life. Meanwhile, other guests continued to notice the unusual dynamic unfolding. They watched the interaction, whispered quietly to one another, and exchanged looks of admiration. Some were deeply moved by the realization that the waitress was deaf and yet had managed to navigate the evening with grace, patience, and professionalism. The awareness spread gradually, and soon the entire room seemed to carry a shared respect for her resilience and skill. It was no longer just a busy evening at a restaurant. It had become a moment of quiet inspiration for all who were present. The young waitress continued her work. Moving between tables with renewed energy, she delivered food, refilled drinks, and took orders with calm precision. Every interaction was smoother, more confident, and more assured. She could feel the difference that the CEO's support had made, and it gave her a sense of validation she had rarely experienced. The act of understanding, simple yet profound, had transformed her evening and her approach to her work. She could now move with even more grace, knowing that someone had acknowledged her efforts and understood the challenges she faced. At one point, CEO gestured for her to come closer. He signed that he wanted to help her directly in a small way. She approached, curious and cautious. He handed her a small card with a written message of encouragement and support, emphasizing that her work was exceptional and that her patience and dedication were admired. She read it, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. The message was simple, but it carried immense weight. In that quiet moment, she felt truly seen, truly acknowledged, and truly supported. It was a validation of her hard work, her resilience, and her determination. Guests around them had noticed the exchange, and some were visibly moved. A few whispered to one another, sharing their admiration for the young waitress and the CEO. Some quietly reflected on how they had been impatient earlier, realizing that they had taken for granted the effort and skill required to serve them effectively. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted further, a subtle but profound change. Respect replaced impatience, admiration replaced indifference. The presence of understanding and empathy had altered the perception of everyone in the room. The young waitress, now feeling a deep sense of encouragement, returned to her duties with renewed vigor. She moved more fluidly, her gestures more assured, and her confidence evident. Customers noticed the change, responding with warmth and patience. The CEO observed quietly, satisfied that his small act of understanding had made a meaningful difference. He had not disrupted the evening, nor had he drawn attention to himself unnecessarily. Instead, he had provided support and validation in a way that empowered the young waitress to excel and regain her confidence. As the night wore on, the restaurant gradually began to quiet down. Tables were finishing their meals, guests were leaving with smiles, and the atmosphere carried a gentle warmth. The young waitress had successfully navigated the challenges of the evening, supported by the quiet presence of someone who understood her. The CEO, satisfied with the outcome, prepared to return to his own table, knowing that the interaction had left a lasting impact on her and on those who had observed the unfolding events. The manager approached the young waitress at the end of the shift. Quietly acknowledging her exceptional work, he had observed the transformation, the confidence she now carried, and the way she had handled every challenge. He recognized that the support she had received, however brief, had made a profound difference. The young waitress smiled, humbled and grateful, knowing that her dedication and patience had been noticed and appreciated. The evening had become more than just another shift. It had become a story of understanding, human connection, and the power of empathy. As the restaurant closed for the night, the young waitress reflected on the extraordinary events of the evening. She had faced challenges, handled difficult interactions, and navigated the demands of a busy restaurant with calm and grace. She had also